Great. So, profiting by the translator, I will speak in Spanish.
Para los traductores hablaré en español.
A todos. Muchas gracias por volver a estar en este workshop. Hoy tenemos a dos invitados de lujo y es realmente un privilegio y un honor contar con ellos. De nuevo, muchísimas gracias a Euge, a Sharin y a los traductores y al GBHI, por supuesto, tanto como a Brainlat y a Rodrigo por todo el apoyo logístico. Ustedes saben que los que están participando en vivo son un grupo selecto, pero hay varias personas que se inscribieron y no han podido, por cupos no han podido participar, pero vamos a colgar en YouTube este workshop para que después puedan acceder. Entonces, hoy vamos a tener dos sesiones realmente fenomenales de la mano de Kenneth Kosik.
Hello, I'm back.
Ah, ok.
Estoy de vuelta.
Signal for a moment. It was,
Perdí la señal por un momento, pero es mi culpa. No hay problemas. Estoy hablando en español, pero creo que entiendes. Si quieres usar la traducción, puedes usar el botón en la parte inferior del lado derecho. Sí, debería estar bien. Gracias.
Así que bueno, como les decía, es un lujo de contar con dos invitados estelares y para no demorar más, vamos a arrancar directamente y voy a hacer la primera presentación. Para mí es realmente una alegría contar con ambos. Creo que a Kenneth Kosik lo deben conocer todos, pero él es neurólogo y dirige el Kosik Lab en la Universidad de California de Santa Bárbara. Ha hecho contribuciones tremendamente relevantes en el ámbito de la biología molecular y la genética de las enfermedades neurodegenerativas y del Alzheimer en particular. Pero no se ha quedado ahí, ha hecho muchos trabajos para desarrollar terapias innovativas, para generar conciencia. Y bueno, por supuesto, él junto con el doctor Francisco Lopera han liderado el estudio de el conglomerado familiar más grande del mundo en Alzheimer genético. Y bueno, Ken tiene una experiencia en producción científica brutal, ha publicado, tiene más de casi 50.000 citas, ha publicado en Nature y en Science creo que unas cuantas veces, es altamente citado y contar con él la verdad que es una alegría. Y sin más, le voy a dar la palabra para que aprendamos de él.
so does that mean we're ready to go?
¿Estamos listos entonces? Eso es lo que quiere decir. Esperen, déjenme preguntarle si me escuchan bien. ¿Me escuchan bien, cierto? No sé si lo puedo escuchar. Entonces, déjenme comenzar. Déjenme asegurarme que tengan un buen audio. Creo que para varias personas es difícil manejar esto porque es un gran tema. La escritura es algo que la gente hace durante todo un semestre como curso. Así que es muy difícil. Y yo creo que no es solamente para una sesión. Estaría fácil de hacer esto de nuevo en pequeños grupos. Estoy pensando en esto como una introducción más que nada al problema y cómo podemos enfrentarlo. Es muy interesante realmente como tema y comprende no solamente la escritura en general, lo cual es difícil para los escritores no nativos, poner sus pensamientos en un papel, ¿cierto? Y de una forma sucinta. Y cuando estamos lidiando con dos idiomas distintos, eso lo hace muy interesante, porque hay muchas palabras en español que no se traducen directamente al inglés, fácilmente al menos, y viceversa. Hay muchos puntos y creo que quizás vamos a querer tocar en alguno de estos puntos. Además, como una forma de presentación, tengo varias personas acá y les pido que no sean tímidas de hablar. Pueden hablar en inglés o español si quieren. Puedo entender un poco y si tengo problemas seguro alguien me va a ayudar. Pero por favor participen, porque realmente necesito recibir su feedback y ayuda. Y espero que tengan preguntas propias con los problemas que vamos a mencionar. Manejar un paper en el cual hay muchos coautores, la gente creo que primariamente escritas por Nano, y creo que los puntos que voy a hacer son situaciones que han encontrado en sus papers. Hay muchas cosas que van a aparecer cuando hacen sus propios proyectos. Entonces, esa es la introducción. El punto 1, parte 1. Hay una parte 2 también. Y esa es algunas observaciones de alto nivel acerca de escribir en general, antes de que pasemos a este paper. Número 1. Escribir un paper científico no es como escribir una novela de misterio. La línea principal, fuerte, el punchline, está al comienzo. Lo dices de inmediato, al tiro, como decimos en Chile. La gente no tiene mucha paciencia y no van a leer más allá. Algunos ni siquiera leen el título. Y si tienes suerte, van a leer tu abstract. Y tienes que captar su atención en el abstract de inmediato. Generalmente con las primeras 2 frases los toma su atención. Sabemos esto de mucha literatura psicológica, que las decisiones se hacen a menudo en persona, muy rápidamente, y tomamos decisiones acerca de los papers de la misma forma. Así que asegúrense que sus frases iniciales hagan o pongan de manifiesto su punto de vista. Ese es lo número 1. Y otro punto que quería establecer acá, al escribir un paper científico, en general, a menudo las personas en el laboratorio generan una serie de cifras o figuras, y eso se transforma en la base de su sección de resultados. Esa es una forma de proceder, y creo que es una buena forma de proceder, pero hay una cosa paralela que me gusta hacer, especialmente si entro a un área que quizás no conozca tan bien, o debiera, quizás. Es un territorio nuevo, un nuevo paper, y esto es desde mis propios propósitos. Yo escribo la sección background primero, porque realmente es importante que un paper alcance, llegue a las personas. Usted tiene que saber lo que sucede en el campo, de manera de presentar, vender, entre comillas, su paper de la forma correcta. Los revisores se van a sentir decepcionados de inmediato si no saben de qué estás hablando. Y a menudo escribo una sección de background, de fondo, para educarme a mí mismo, y luego muestro lo esencial, para entregar un sentido, que realmente conozco el campo al generar este background, para todo el trabajo que intentamos presentar. Así que esas son 2 formas de proceder. Otra cosa que me gusta hacer es, y es válida para mí y para ustedes, cuando escribes un papel, tienes muchos pensamientos, tienes muchas ideas que las tienes en tu cabeza, hay muchas clases de actividades mentales que están ocurriendo acá, ¿no? Y es divertido escribir un paper, porque tienes y generas tus propias ideas, las cuales provienen de escribir, y escribir realmente me ayuda a generar nuevas ideas. Entonces, la mayor parte de esas ideas probablemente van a terminar siendo inútiles, o si no inútiles, no tan interesantes para el paper. Lo que hago entonces es mantener un archivo separado que genera mis pensamientos solamente. Como puntos importantes, bullet points. Y cuando llega el momento, al final de escribirlos, vuelvo a este archivo con los pensamientos que he guardado ahí. Y el paper tiene que tener un flujo, ¿cierto? Es como una pieza musical y que te lleva. Y luego, cuando el buen paper termina con una nota, una observación altamente intelectual, esa tiene que realmente provenir no como tan solo una epifanía, sino que ha evolucionado con el tiempo para llegar a los puntos importantes, a la información importante que quieres tratar de presentar en el paper. ¿Alguien me está escuchando? ¿Me están escuchando? Me acabo de dar cuenta de que quizás estoy hablando un poco muy rápido. Entonces, estas son algunas ideas background, de fondo. Ahora voy a ver si puedo saber cómo, o si no, denme un segundo para mostrar ese material y compartirlo en la pantalla. Aquí es donde yo realmente espero que ustedes me ayuden o me digan, o déjenme ver si puedo hacerlo. Ok, ahora estoy compartiendo pantalla. Déjenme hablar un poquito más. ¿Alguien tiene preguntas? Para estar seguro de que están ahí afuera, escuchándome. ¿Alguien quiere decirme algo acerca de sus propias experiencias al escribir un paper? No sean tímidos. Que alguien hable, por favor. O quizás puedan tener que llamarlos para escucharlos. Sus voces no me llegan de alguna forma. ¿Estás muteado quizás? Quizás si seleccionas inglés en el botón de traducción, en la parte inferior, el botón de traducción, en la parte inferior de la botonera Zoom. Ahora trata de hacerlo. ¿Puedes escucharme? Solamente quiero mencionar, Ken, de que ayer trabajamos en la típica sección de escritura introductoria, material y temas de discusión, etcétera. Con Adolfo trabajamos en eso durante 3 horas, con lo básico para la escritura. Pero creo que conozco a la mayor parte de los participantes y muchos de ellos tienen experiencia publicando. Quizás otros no tienen tanta experiencia. Muy bien. Entonces, pasemos y entremos en materia. Hay una pregunta. Hola, Ken. Hola. Gracias por su experiencia escribiendo y su conocimiento y sus consejos. Mi pregunta, Ken, es respecto a algo que mencionaste, de la opción de tratar de escribir sus propias ideas antes de comenzar a guiar con un tema, como una forma de expresar sus propias ideas. Y después de tratar de reconciliar dichas ideas o sincronizarlas con el background en un tema típico. Mi pregunta es, en mi caso, cuando trato de hacer eso, tengo muchas páginas de escritura que escribo. Y me enfrento con un background, con un tema, y todas esas ideas desaparecen. Hay una confrontación muy fuerte ahí, porque el background de un tema está demasiado enfocado, demasiado estrecho, y a veces tus ideas son muy extrañas para un escenario en particular. En mi caso, trato de comenzar con la lectura del tema y después trato de formular mis propias ideas. Quizás es una forma sesgada o una forma de convencer acerca de mis ideas, pero me gustaría saber tu opinión al respecto. Son buenos puntos los que estableces. A veces, cuando empiezas a profundizar en un tema y quieres estar seguro de que estás leyendo los papers claves que fueron publicados antes que el tuyo. Y no es una mala idea tomar notas mientras lo haces. Estas son notas personales, no estás tratando de alinear el paper, estás tratando solamente de tomar un par de hechos que van a ser relevantes en tu paper. Lo que haces es construir y transformarlas en las citaciones de tu paper. Yo creo que tienes razón. Si comienzas de una forma muy difuminada, vas a meterte en problemas. Así que pasar a esos papers iniciales y alinearlos o diseñarlos en una pieza separada, en un archivo separado, también puede ser un parafraseo a algunas statements o declaraciones sacadas de otros papers. Y yo creo que es una forma buena de hacerlo. Otras personas tienen otros puntos de vista. Hay un dicho famoso que dice, de un filósofo famoso, que cuando escribió su libro, dijo, solamente quiero mejorar, mi propio pensamiento, lo que él llamaba la higiene cerebral, y no leía nada. No sé, a menos que sea un manual, no sé si eso es una idea en particular muy buena. Así que muchas gracias por esos comentarios. Déjenme ver si puedo compartir mi pantalla ahora. Ok. Aquí viene. Muy bien. Ahora pueden ver todos la introducción, ¿cierto? Muy bien. Este es un paper que mencioné, que Steven Nanom están trabajando en esto. No lo he visto antes. No lo había visto antes. Entonces, lo veo por primera vez y tomé algunas notas al respecto. Estas son notas, observaciones que surgieron justo en el mismo orden de la escritura. No necesariamente tienen que ver con la idea principal que queremos, ¿cierto?, promover. Quizás ni siquiera deberíamos hablar de esto, porque a veces la idea surge o me llega, que me llega, digamos, no es cierta, quizás. Esto no está relacionado a la escritura, solamente me hace pensar que escribo los determinantes respecto a la salud, a la demencia, que están relacionadas con muchas condiciones médicas, o condiciones cardíacas médicas. Quizás nos vamos a saltar esto porque cae en una categoría distinta, de algo más sustantivo, de lo que están tratando de escribir. La próxima línea acá, veamos esta frase. Una persona va a leer esta frase. El riesgo cardiometabólico en aumento en LMIC ha estado asociado con tasas de demencia en aumento. ¿Qué está malo con esto? ¿Cuál es el error ahí?
¿Creen que eso suena correcto? Creo que el verbo está en la posición incorrecta. Se ocupa el verbo de elevar de manera incorrecta. Por ejemplo, si decimos dementia rates rising, lo que sugiere Stephanie, y que sea asociado con las tasas o el aumento de las tasas de demencia. Bueno, incluso un pequeño cambio en un verbo. Ven aquí, la forma en que lo he parafraseado es que se asocia con las tasas de demencia. Ahora bien, va a haber muchos elementos que surjan que tendrán que ver con lo que les suene por oído y pasamos toda la vida escuchando un idioma, ¿verdad? Inglés o español. Yo ni siquiera estoy seguro de por qué suena mejor, se ha asociado con un aumento en las tasas de demencia versus el verbo al final. Hay una razón para eso, simplemente suena mejor. Creo que a medida que vas trabajando más y más en esto, desarrollas un sentido, incluso si es que no es el inglés tu idioma materno, se puede desarrollar ese sentido del oído. Ahora, vamos por esta frase. Ahora estamos en otra área aquí, estamos saliendo un poco de la gramática y entrando a un área en donde hablamos de las connotaciones de las palabras, porque las palabras operan en muchos niveles. Puede que haya algunas que estén gramaticalmente correctas, pero también tienen que tener el tipo de connotación aceptada. Cuando leí esta frase, la palabra sufriendo me llevó a un lado incorrecto. No es porque esté errónea la palabra, pero pareciera, bueno, al menos, no sé, para mí la palabra suffering tiene o el sufrimiento, sufriendo, hay una connotación negativa. Si alguien está sufriendo es algo muy malo. Y en este paper se está intentando analizar el problema de una forma más desapegada. Por supuesto que todos somos empáticos al sufrimiento, pero yo no sé si lo que queremos es emplear un término en este punto del texto a un nivel connotativo del idioma que vaya a ser tan emotiva, porque va a hacer surgir un grado de emoción importante cuando en verdad lo que queremos es demostrar o representar hechos estadísticos. Yo pondría simplemente aumenta las tasas de demencia. Sufriendo para mí me suena más bien extraño o ajeno en este contexto. Puede estar en desacuerdo conmigo. Acá estamos en el terreno de la opinión. Sí, por favor, Claudia, está silenciada. Eso sí. Muchas gracias nuevamente. Mi pregunta aquí, por ejemplo, el suffering o el sufriendo en Latinoamérica. Sufrir de demencia es el término en español. Muchas gracias por decir eso. Quería, em, bueno, la palabra en inglés puede tener una connotación un tanto diferente. Y aquí es donde es un poco engañoso cuando pasamos de un idioma a otro, porque ustedes en español sí dirían sufrir, pero en inglés no sonaría tan correcto. Hay otra mano levantada, Cristiano. Sí, muchas gracias, profesor Ken. Me pregunto si la palabra desarrollando podría ser un sustituto para el sufriendo. Desarrollando demencia, bueno, eso nos lleva a una dirección diferente porque hay un componente temporal. Desarrollando implica algo que está cambiando. Creo que puede, para la escritura científica, para la reacción científica, hay que hacerlo lo más simple y claro posible. A las palabras más extrañas, bueno, externas puede que haya que evitarlas, absolutamente, acá podríamos sacarla. Sí, solo quería mencionar es que me sorprende que todo el texto no está en rojo, como generalmente pasa en las revisiones, así es que estoy muy contento. Bueno, esto es positivo, no todo está marcado en rojo. Acá vemos otra cosa. Pueden estar hablando de que todo esté corregido en rojo, pero si vemos en este párrafo, de la palabra the en inglés, que es es una de las palabras más complejas en inglés. ¿Por qué? Sí, que vemos el primer caso donde dice the social health and educational access, el acceso social, sanitario, educacional. Vemos que acá existe un problema con eso. Mm, La palabra the en inglés y en español es un artículo definido, ¿verdad? A veces lo sacamos. Aquí, bueno, pues de eso se trata, de desarrollar como un oído para el idioma en español. A veces tampoco ocupan el artículo definido, otras veces sí, pero en este caso, según mi oído, me parece que sin el artículo definido se hace aún, bueno, más indefinido, pero suena mejor. No tengo una buena regla, pero les puedo decir eso. Cindy, tú estás acá, tú enseñas inglés y redacción. ¿Tienes una regla para el uso del artículo, los artículos definidos e indefinidos? No, pero mi esposo está aquí conmigo que conoce la gramática al revés y al derecho, así que le voy a preguntar. No, no, no. Sí, que lo ponga en el chat. Bueno, muy bien. Sigamos avanzando. Ahora vamos a pasar a el estudio. Este es acá tenemos un problema en donde cómo se aplica en los presentes y pasados. En general, en la redacción científica intentamos ocupar el tiempo pasado. No siempre se puede, claro. Si te estás refiriendo a una figura en el paper, dirías, esta imagen muestra, ¿verdad? Representa en presente porque está allí y se está mostrando actualmente, pero en su mayoría cuando hablamos de los experimentos que se han realizado, generalmente se ocupa el tiempo pasado. Aquí, the current study aimed, o sea, el estudio actual apuntó. Acá lo destaqué porque se piensa en que los tiempos verbales sean coherentes a lo largo de todo el artículo, que guarden coherencia en todo.
Here's the next one. I'm just going to highlight this. Let's see. So the current study aimed to bridge these gaps by assessing the impact of disparities such as demographic, blah, blah, and how they interact. So now we're going to talk about the comma. Okay. And in this case, I can't remember if I added that comma or you already had it in there, but it is it is correct to put a comma in. Commas can be controversial, but in this case, they're not. When you have a sentence and that is two sentences that are, or two phrases that are combined with a conjunction, the word and the second part of the conjunction has the subject there, then you have to put a comma. So this second part, see, so here's the conjunction and here's the subject of the second part, they. So this absolutely requires a comma. Now, where commas get controversial is when you have a list of things and you say, you know, I really like to eat apples, pears, peaches, and grapes. So this is, if you put a comma before the word grapes, this is called the Oxford comma. And people, you know, my preference would be to use it, to put a comma even before the last thing in the list. But not everybody agrees. I don't know, Cindy, what do you think about the Oxford comma?
I was just putting in the chat that I am also a big fan of the Oxford comma.
Good. Okay, thank you. I'm glad I got support from an English literature professor. Thank you. Okay, so here, now we're up to this sentence here. This one is really interesting. Colombia is an adequate LMIC country. This is where, so you have the word adecuada in Spanish. It doesn't mean the same as adequate in English. In fact, to say it's adequate in English is actually a little bit insulting. You know, it's just adequate. What you really want to say, adecuada is really translated suitable. It's a suitable country, country. So you have to be careful of that. There are many words like this when you go between Spanish and English. The one that, you know, there's another word in Spanish that you say is actualmente. Doesn't mean actually, it means currently. So these examples go on and on. And here, I'm sorry to say, Agustin and Nana, you guys made an egregious mistake. So, okay, here we go, the next sentence. This one is a little tricky. The country holds high social inequalities. So holds this doesn't work. I can tell you that right off the bat. But I'm really interested in what you're going to say about maybe that, you know, you can see my comment here. You know, we might say the country has high social inequalities. I'm not sure, but do you say el país tiene una, would you say that? Or el país presenta? Why did you say holds? I can't figure out what Spanish word you were thinking of to try to translate it that way.
No, that was my mistake, because I think that in the original sentence it says have, but I don't know why I changed it, to be honest.
But hold sometimes means in Spanish like
sostener.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Right. So that's, yeah. So sostener would be like or contains. That's what you contains high. Yeah. So right. So that must be what you were thinking. But it does so, but it doesn't work in English. So I think you've got that right now. Okay. Okay, here now we're up to one here, down here, exhaustive approaches. Now, this is a matter of opinion. You know, some people like to say that because, you know, in my view is I think that's sort of self-aggrandizing. I think that some reviewers will be put off. Some will say, wow, they did exhaustive approaches. That's pretty good. They must be really great researchers. Because most of us don't do exhaustive approaches. Why do you want to say exhaustive approaches? I think it's just sort of like, you know, boosting yourself up more than is necessary. So I would take that word out, but you don't have to. Okay.
Ken, we've got a couple of hands raised.
Oh, good. I like the questions the most. So please go ahead.
So Cristiano, I don't know if you still had a question. Your hand has been up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know.
Okay, no problem. Then not a problem at all. Agustin, it goes to you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, it's a quick comment on that. So I realized this kind of self-aggrandizing style is quite exploited by Latinians. You know, for one side, you know, we are not running in the first place in science, so we need to show more than we have sometimes. And this is a bias that I started to change when I became older. You know, at the beginning, the same paper 10 years ago, I would say this incredible, this powerful, this extensive, you know, and today I will try to be more modest.
Yeah.
Even when still we have this mark, I think that because there's so many bias and difficult to get publication from Latin America, sometimes we tend to overemphasize some aspect of the positive aspect of the work in order to get recognition. Yeah,
well, that's reasonable, and but probably in the long run, it may not help once you're publishing at a pretty high level.
Absolutely, yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay, did I see another hand, Stephanie? Was your hand up for a moment?
No, actually, I was going to say exactly the same thing that Agustin said. So.
Oh, really? Okay, good. Good. Okay, so now let's see where we are now. Okay, so you can see, let's see. So I'm now at this paragraph, first theory driven, blah, blah, kind of interactions and how they predict. Okay, so let me see what I wrote here. Yeah, so So look at this sentence carefully. So here at the beginning, it's theory-driven methods aimed to assess, right? You put this in the infinitive. And then you have a conjunction here. And so, and again, we said this before, maybe I should put a comma in there. And how they, so you changed the verb. Here you have the verb as the infinitive, and here you have the verb, you've taken it out of the infinitive and you're doing it a different way. So why don't you just say, and to predict? So it matches. It should be parallel, right? To assess and to predict. To predict, right? Okay. Then here, why did you write a priori? Was that just a mistake, or was it such a weird thing? I mean, I know what you meant. You meant a priori, which you see here in my tracking. Do you say, you don't say this in Spanish, do you? A priori?
Yes, in Spanish sometimes you use the
yes.
priori.
Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes you use the y at the end.
Yeah, I mean like two components, you know, not one single word.
I see. Okay. So
A priori, but the last letter is I. It's
I.
not,
Okay. Yeah, it should be
not,
I even in, yeah,
yes.
right. That's how, right. Good. Okay. Good. So let's see. Now let's go to the next sentence. Moreover, in the data-driven methods we included, which are less theoretically central. But that, okay, so here, see this word that I crossed out? Sometimes, so we have a concept, I'm sure you have it in Spanish too, of words that are called elliptical. That means they're not actually there on the page, but they're there in your mind, you know, so, and sometimes if a word is really obvious, it just slows you down to put it in there, and it sounds better to leave it out and to make it elliptical. So here, I would say, moreover, in the data-driven methods, we included other health variables which are less theoretically central, but have. I don't think you need that have. That just really puts this sentence more into the mud. It, you know, it slows it down. You don't need that word that in there. So, but have, and then let's go on to the next part here. But have been considered in the literature. So why do you have to say have? So here's a big problem in everybody's writing, that it falls under the general category of what we call wordiness. You're putting in more words than you need. If you have more words than you need, it's going to be much harder to read your paper. Why do you have to say considered in the literature? I mean, you have citations here, you have all kinds of stuff. And it's pretty obvious that, that have been associated, if you skip that, you just said have been associated with SDH. Why do you have to say in the literature? I mean, is there any other possibility where this could possibly be true? Of course it's in the literature. So
yeah,
you gotta, yeah.
No, just to clarify why we put that, I fully agree that we should avoid the wording, and this is something that I have been working a lot with Nano for years.
Yeah.
But in this case, you know, because we have a theory-driven model and a data-driven model, so we want to emphasize that we have this first theoretical model and then other variables that has been related or that are in the literature, but not clearly specified in the theoretical model. So maybe we choose the wrong way to try to make this.
So you're making a very good point. So if you want to do it that way, right after the word literature, you need a reference.
Okay.
So that people know what literature you're talking about.
Great.
Good. Okay, now here comes a situation with the opposite of, this is like making something elliptical when it shouldn't be. So it's not always, even though it sometimes might be sound a little redundant, it's not so great to just start a sentence with these and then have whatever these is modifying be elliptical. You should put in these what? I mean, I think if someone is really trying to read this quickly, they'll want to know what these is referring to. And it helps them.
Other variables. Yeah.
Huh?
To other variables, right?
To other variables, yeah. So like you could, yeah, exactly right. To other variables. In fact, that's what I think my note said. Needs a subject. These variables. That's right. Just what I put in there too. Exactly. So that makes it much easier to read. Okay. Let's go into, now we're down to the next paragraph. Convergent results between, let's see here, what did I try to say here, what's going on? The anticipated results include a convergence. Convergent results, so here comes the question of the passive voice. So this is again something that we can discuss. People in science tend to like the passive voice, because they don't have to then claim responsibility. But usually it's, if you can avoid the passive voice, it's a little bit better. So I changed the sentence here. You can look it over in my tracking. It just says the anticipated results include, which is now in the active voice. But again, this is not a hard, fast rule. It's something you have to think carefully about every time you use a passive, because it can be appropriate. I don't know, Cindy, what do you think about the passive voice?
I am, and this will be in my presentation, a big fan of very few rules when it comes to writing. So I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule against using it. I think everything when you write should just be thoughtful. Like if you're using the passive voice, like make sure you have a reason for it. If you're using the active, make sure you have a reason for that. And if you use it, you don't want to overuse it. Just rhetorically speaking, you want to alternate the way your sentences are reading. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of the one rule I think applies to writing, but in terms of passive, I do think active is clearer, but that there are, as you say, occasions where, you know, you don't want to take responsibility and you want to hide in the passive, and that can be okay too.
Good. So, this I think might be a little tricky for in thinking about how you say equivalent things in Spanish, because this is something I struggle with when I try to like learn a little bit of Spanish. I see that there's usages where people in Spanish tend to use the reflexive as a kind of passive. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about this. I was, I had trying to remember these. I had jotted down somewhere a couple sentences, two sentences. I don't know if I can find it so easily. Let me see if I can recreate it right here. Say nos murió. Nosotros moríamos. What's the difference, guys? This is, now we're going to reverse the lesson. You have to teach me something.
So, se nos murió, it's referred to other person that died.
Other
Nosotros,
person.
other person, yes, a third person. Like, you know, our grandpa was dying. Nosotros morimos, it should be that all of us die.
I see. Okay, so Okay, so then that's a very clear distinction then. Okay, because when I look at the translations, they come out pretty similar when they try to translate them in English. And that had confused me greatly. But notice how when you did say for this one, I think you translated that as sort of a passive voice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
I think, Ken, is that the first option refers to the possibility that the action is made by other or by, I don't know, it's not your active action.
yes.
I mean, and the second one, if you can provide a sentence saying that you, I mean, you are the leader of an action. I mean, you are the who is acting something. Maybe you can use the active voice. For me, it's difficult to use the active voice because of that.
Yeah, but see, I think you guys have two ways of doing passive. One would be something like this sentence, and then you have this other word that I always struggle with here, sido. So that something has.
Yes.
So you have two types of passive in a way.
Yes. Yeah, well, in both cases, there are two differences, right? One is passive voice versus active voice, and other is including ourselves versus not. So there are two different distinctions in both sentences. I don't know if there is related to that point that you want to make, Ken, but they are not exactly different just in the, I mean, they are different not just regarding passive voice.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting because it may be, not sure I fully understand it, and I know I don't understand this in sort of day-to-day street usage of Spanish, but it does sort of sense to me that you have some grammatical means at your disposal to say some things that may be more difficult to say in English, because you have two different ways of dissociating yourself from the subject.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have big problems to don't use the passive voice. You know, it sometimes is more complex to, I mean, when you have to present a complex idea, it's more easy to us in general to writing down in passive voice. And because of that, we perseverate in that kind of non-adequate is another word that we shouldn't use, but the best way to do that.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so let's just finish up here then with, let's see, I have a couple more here. Let's see. Moreover, considering the, let's do this here, sorry. Moreover, considering the increased social inequalities in the population being studied. This is better to just say understudy, and the population understudy. I can just tell you that you can easily make mistakes with participles, you know, these ing words in English. And so I would just, I think you can say that in a more simple way. Let's go here. Okay, demographic and SDH would have a more considerable weight. So this is an example of wordiness. You can just say greater weight. You made two words when you could just use one.
Yeah.
And let's see what this is about. And functional capacity, let's see, then CMR and another related. Okay, here I think you probably meant other related, not another.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. You get the difference, right? It's
yes.
The another is much more specific. So okay, well, we've come up on the hour, and I will just maybe I can figure out how to, let's just, I want to, can I stop sharing screen here somehow? Stop sharing. There we go. Good. Okay, well, so are there any final comments or questions? That just gives you a little idea of how I think when I'm editing a text at a very line by line level. So there you have it. let's see, I see maybe these comments are in the chat are no longer relevant.
Thank you so much, Ken. I think that it's a privilege to have this chance to see sentence by sentence. So please don't be shy to the members. It's a great opportunity to make any kind of questions to our really expert. So go ahead.
Great. Okay, and I'm going to hang on then because I'm very interested in hearing what Cindy has to say too. So I'll be here for another hour.
Sorry, great. But we have
a question from Shoni Mejia.
Oh, good.
Johnny.
Yes, thank you, Ken. I wonder about the usage of acronyms or abbreviations, and like if there's a norm to use them.
Yeah, so this piece has a lot of acronyms. There's many abbreviations in there. And that means, and that creates a mental burden for the reader because you have to remember them. And I have to admit, in this paper, I didn't remember any of them. So I sometimes think I don't know how to get around that. Maybe some things you just might want to spell out every single time. Yeah, but that gets lengthy too. Again, there's no really good answer. You have to use your judgment, but if your paper is very weighted on acronyms, it's going to be hard to read.
Yeah, this is a really good point. We use a lot of acronyms to reduce word length and text length.
Yeah.
But there are some journals. Brain, for instance, doesn't allow, just only standard acronyms, and that's it. So, well, maybe it's not the best strategy to reduce word length.
Good. Okay.
And
okay.
Christiana, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, thank you, Shireen. It's just a very focused question. Is about which and that. We came across this sentence that was something related to health, economics, and these other things which are related to. So I was wondering if you do use sometimes, because as far as I know, which it has to be like in between commas, and that is something that we don't have to use in commas. So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's also confusing. Again, you did say it right. If the which does take a comma, that does not. But how you choose, which you're going to use, in that sentence I just said you have to use which, then that gets a little bit harder. There are some rules. I don't know, maybe Cindy can help a little bit here. I usually go more by what my ear is and try to keep the manuscript, like not use which repeatedly, but there are some rules for that one that I don't have at the tip of my fingers. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Ken. It's a really a pleasure to have the chance to give the feedback, and I am pretty sure that you could make hundreds of more revisions, and you have been very empathetic, I would say. Thank you for that. And now is the time to introduce Cindy. So it's a great pleasure also to me to introduce Cindy. Cindy is a professor of American literature at the Caltech, the California Institute of Technology, and she has expertise in 19th century. She has written many books and monographs. She teaches different courses on literature, women fictions, and Edward Allan Poe, which is an author I really love. But I have I had the great pleasure to share the cohort at the Global Brain Health Institute. I learned so much from her, especially, how she combined her profession with her personal life. So she have writing a beautiful book called Finding the Right Words. It's a story of an English professor studying neurology and trying to understand, how her father died from Alzheimer's. And Cindy was working with Bruce Miller, to translate, using her unique literary skills, but also with a neurologist, but being able to transmit the first-person experience and making a universal experience maybe for all the people that have been suffering in this case from a similar situation. So it's a great honor to me to invite Cindy to share her thoughts, and thank you, as in the case of Ken, thank you so much for helping us to learn to write better.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Agustin. I really enjoyed Ken's presentation, and I'm going to transition into mine by just picking up a couple of things Ken talked about in the last hour. But I also just want to say that there are people in this Zoom room who helped me and Bruce write the book. And so I just want to extend, you know who you are. I want to extend a thank you to those people, and also just say how great it is to see some of the new GBHI fellows that I had the honor of meeting last week. So it's just really great, and thank you for asking me, Agustin, to do this. I want to also say that like Ken, if after this conversation, which is the first of hopefully many, you would like to follow up and talk to me about your writing, there are people in this room again who know I love to do that. What we just did for the last hour is my idea of play, and it was really fun. And it was one of the best parts of GBHI for me, working with people for whom English was not their first language, and doing everything I could to make sure that when I was asked that I could be helpful in terms of editing articles that were going to be sent to journals, it was really, truly a wonderful experience. I also want to say that there are things I'm going to talk about in this next hour that will overlap with your strategies for scientific writing, and I think there are things that will not. Whenever I find myself in a situation like this where I am the only English professor in the room, some of my comments, I think, are really off the wall. And I hope that they inspire you to maybe think about your writing in different ways. This is going to be really different than what Ken did. Although in the second part of the presentation, there will be some overlap. But just a couple of other things Ken mentioned when he was talking about wordiness. One of the adages that Bruce shared with me that I think about all the time is less is more. And I think that's a good mantra to keep in mind as you're writing. And I have tried to do that in the last several years since I met Bruce. I think that's really true. I also think grabbing the reader right away is very important. That looks different, I think, in a scientific writing paper than in the kind of writing I do, but maybe not, and we can talk a little bit about that today. I also loved Ken's point that writing is like a piece of music, and I will, thanks to Shireen, play a little music in the course of the PowerPoint. Fingers crossed that the technology works. And so with that, oh, also, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, go in the chat. At some point in the course of this hour, I'm going to ask you to break up into groups for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back and talk a bit. So I'm really looking forward to that. Now I am going to try and do a screen share. And let's see where, let's see. Here it is. Let's see if this works. So I made a PowerPoint. Is that working? I'm not seeing it.
It's loading.
Not yet.
Loading, okay. Loading. Is it still loading? Okay,
Yes.
it's big. Oh, I see. Shireen, do you think it would be, usually it comes up right away.
Yeah, that's surprising.
Do you want me to do stop share and you try?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. We'll do this. And then let me just set this.
Oh,
screen.
okay. So I'm just gonna say next slide. If
Okay.
that's okay. So this is just, I have Q&A at the end, but as I said, please feel free if there's something that comes up that you want to talk about. So next slide. Okay. One of the things that I think was so valuable about Ken's presentation was the discussion of translation. And I think about my work over the last few years as an act of translation, but different in terms of what I was trying to do was to translate personal experience into an experience that would resonate for many people, and also to translate neurology into a language that I am fluent in, which is the language of literature and the language of artistry and aesthetics. And so these opening slides are just sort of my brain at work, and images of the brain. And I just kind of wanted to put these out there. You'll see, you know, the first image of the brain. It's kind of typical. And then the second one, we start moving into little Jimi Hendrix land. And then can we do the next slide, Shireen? And then we get even sort of more aesthetic, and I'm a big fan of surrealism, which we're gonna, I'm gonna show a few slides in a little bit of Magritte and Dali. But I really liked this image of the brain and a door and the footsteps and entering the brain. And then next slide, Shireen. And then, you know, purple haze. And for me, a really kind of nice image of science and art coming together in the brain. And I think what I'll do is just sort of go through these very kind of bizarre slides, and then we can talk a little bit about what I'm interested in is, from your point of view as scientists, as neurologists, what you think the role of artistic representation and aesthetic representation, how that might inform people's understanding of how the brain works, or do you see them as really dichotomous and almost antithetical? For me, the work that I did in the last few years helped me realize the kind of intersections, while also being mindful of the divergences. But I'm really interested in your perspective on this. So let's go to the next slide. This is an image of the brain that appears in Finding the Right Words. And I guess I'm just kind of curious, really, you know, you're the scientists in the room. When you see images like this, what do you, like, why do we have colors? You know, like, what is the value of representing the brain in this particular way? And maybe that's too open-ended for right now. But I'm really curious to hear from you what these representations of the brain do that sort of the less colorful, less aestheticized representations of the brain do. We can just kind of keep that on pause because there are a couple of other images. Ken talking about grammar and Cindy talking about the brain is a surreal morning. That's really funny. Okay, next slide. So here's another representation of the brain. I am a big fan of Emily Dickinson. And one of the reasons why I was drawn to writing the book with Bruce is that I had seen him give a presentation that began with a discussion of Emily Dickinson. And I'll just read this poem and maybe we could just do a little close reading of it together. Or maybe better yet, I would love someone else's voice in the room. So would someone volunteer to read the poem? And like Ken, if you don't, I will call on you. I will call on somebody.
I think that Cristiano was just a second ago.
Great.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I can go.
Thank you, Cristiano.
Thank you for the opportunity, Cindy. So the brain is wider than the sky. The brain is wider than the sky. For put them side by side. The one, the other will contain with ease and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea. For hold them blue to blue. The one, the other will absorb as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for left them pound for pounds, and they will differ if they do as syllable from sound.
Beautiful. Thank you, Cristiano.
Thank you.
Anyone want to talk about a line from this poem or what you think this poem is saying about the brain? I'm not going to, there's, your answers will not be graded. I really would just love to hear some of you neurologists who really study the brain. Tell me what you think of this poem. Anyone?
I think it's beautiful, and I think it's saying here wider than the sky and deeper than the sea, and the weight of God. It's saying that it's very vast, and I imagine the brain like that as well, because we study our whole lives to understand the brain, but then in the end, you realize that you really don't understand much of it. So the brain is really vast. There's a lot of things that you don't understand, possibly you never understand. Maybe that's the beauty of it.
That's lovely. Thank you. Stephanie, were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, actually, it didn't give me the sense of speed. It gave me more the sense of immensity, like something that is very big in size.
I really like this line, as sponges buckets do. That is so incredible.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that Ken, just you focused on the part of the poem that is really, it's a simile, as sponges buckets do, whereas most of the other descriptions of the poem are literalizations. It's not that the brain is like the sky or the brain is like the sea. It is. And I think the power of that verb to be sort of gives the poem a kind of weightiness that is that's more sort of more powerful, I think, than if Dickinson had used similes, except she does in that one part you pointed out, Ken. So I just wanted to share that poem with you.
Can I make a quick comment, Cindy?
Yes, of course, Stephanie.
I think what you just said is very interesting and powerful, because from a scientific perspective, what I have always heard is that the verb to be is like the most boring verb of all.
I know.
Like it can't be used in science because it doesn't have power, it doesn't do anything. And what you showed here is a completely different thing.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it, because what Ken was saying, it's like writing with a purpose, or what you were saying, like knowing what to write, when to write it, and everything is okay if you know why you're putting it there. So I really found this poem very powerful in that sense, because even the things that are boring, if you know how to use them, can become very powerful.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because you're right. I mean, the verb to be, at least when I write, it's kind of, it's not verboten, you know, but you really want to try and have more active verbs, more exciting verbs. But the simplicity of the use of the is just so potent in this poem. So thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
Can I say one quick thing? So
of course.
So for the other people in the call, other than myself and Cindy, the is here is ser, not estar, right?
Yes, it is there.
So, because you have an ability to distinguish different types of to be, whereas in English we do not.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Really nice. Okay, great. Next slide. So again, this is an image from the book with Bruce that was provided by Catherine Peterson. And it is a representation of sort of the progression of Alzheimer's disease. And I find this image really powerful. And in my book with Bruce, I try and translate what this is like, this experience of the development of the spread of dementia. Okay, so next slide. So this is me translating the image of the atrophy. And then when I was thinking about writing this section, I started playing on a loop the opening of Apocalypse Now, which is one of my favorite movies. And this is from the book. Dad lost memory too, but once the disease emerged from its prodromal phase, the obliteration of self was shockingly efficient. Picture the napalm in the opening of Apocalypse Now and hear the doors, the end, playing in the background, something like that. And this was from the behavior section and finding the right words. And Shireen, I'm going to ask you just to play, it's like the first minute or so of the opening. And I just think it's such a, for me, it was a really spot on expression, musically speaking, of what Alzheimer's does to the brain.
Can you see this okay, the PowerPoint?
Yep, it's perfect. So obviously, you know, my point here, and we're going to now get into more practical things about writing, I promise. But just the different media that you can think about in terms of informing how you imagine and represent the brain and brain health and the deterioration of the brain. So next slide. I thought this was really important to include in the book so that people who are going to the neurologist have some kind of fluency, as it were, some kind of exposure to the different kinds of aphasia that the neurologist may talk about when making the diagnosis. And this is courtesy of Zach Miller and some other wonderful neurologists at UCSF. Next slide. And then this was me, again, translating the experience of progressive, primary progressive aphasia. I'll just read this. It was a beautiful spring day in Berkeley, and that evening we were going to make dinner at my house. Dad wanted a salad with his chicken. This seemed like a rather straightforward proposition until we got closer to the market, and Dad realized he wanted something very specific in his salad, but couldn't remember what it was. Capers? I don't think he liked capers, but the past was pretty irrelevant, as I also thought he knew the woman to whom he had been married for over 30 years. At a certain point, my dad's desperation became my own. I couldn't find the word. The two of us began a frantic search through the aisles. With fear and hope, I watched my dad looking at the various cans and boxes of stuff on the shelves, his expression turning from hope to disappointment to sadness and back again with it, each swift rejection of not seeing the thing he could not name. I decided it would be worse for me to keep guessing, so I shut my mouth and just kept him company on his heartbreaking journey through the supermarket. Eventually, we found the croutons. Dad's face lit up. He was so incredibly happy. I could have cried for joy myself. It was over. The relief was physical. Our hunt through the oceans of salad paraphernalia was over. We could go home, make the damn salad, and eat. I'm glad you're laughing. I tried to write it so it would be funny too. Until my dad decided that he wanted to rent a movie. I'll cut to the chase and tell you it was Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but my dad couldn't find the words, and so we started all over again. Next slide. I became increasingly interested in surrealism in the last few months and years. And I think, and I want to write an essay about this, but I love these images from Magritte because I think that even though he wasn't talking about dementia, at least I don't think so. Maybe I need to do some more research and just make sure of that. I love these paintings because I think that they are aesthetic renderings of what the mind, the misfolding of the proteins, what that may end up looking like visually, that you have an object and you have a word and you have no idea what belongs to what. So I just wanted to put those out there. Next slide. There was a discussion amongst the GBHI fellows on authenticity the other day, and there were lots of people weighing in on the loss of self in cases of dementia. And this is one of my favorite Magritte paintings. Augustine, the book in the corner is a Poe edition. It's a Baudelaire edition of the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, but that's another story. But the idea of looking in the mirror and not seeing yourself. I remember seeing video clips, I think people with Lewy body, frontotemporal dementia, having this experience of utter dissociation and not knowing who the person was looking in the mirror. So I wanted to put that out there as well. We're almost done with the art. Next slide. And this is Dali, The Persistence of Memory. I love this painting, and I think there's a very interesting way of thinking about this painting in relation to the tests that neurologists give, where you have to draw the clock and the clocks that are drawn and the people not sort of knowing, you know, what time it is. So I just wanted to put that out there. Let's move on to the more sort of practical part of the talk. Next slide. So rules for writing. As I said, I don't think there are any rules except for one, which is clarity. The most important thing about writing is being clear. And this is so hard to do. Unlike Ken, who talked about writing papers as being fun, I think it's just really hard. And there is a fun factor, but usually for me, it's when it's done. That's when I'm happy. But I just wanted to tell everyone in the room that even if you write for a living, it's brutal. It's very, very hard. And what I want to say is that if you think a sentence you've written is unclear, you can bet your bottom dollar that the reader will also think it's not clear. And if you're trying to fudge it, the reader will know that. And so I just wanted to say that I can't tell you how many times I've read something and written in the margins, this is unclear. And the author says to me, you know what? I was having a really hard time with that sentence. Or I didn't like that word, but I couldn't think of a better one. And so there's no sort of thinking, oh, the reader will understand what I'm trying to say. The reader will not. It is your job to make sure that your writing is so clear that there's no room for ambivalence. Like Emily Dickinson can be ambivalent, but you can't. And so I think that's really important. And I think now that I say it that way, all the art that I just showed you kind of thrives on ambiguity. And you can think about it this way, or you can think about it that way. But when it comes to writing about it, you need to be able to say to the reader as clearly as possible that this is your understanding of that poem or that work of art. Next slide. How do you achieve clarity in your prose? Ask other people to read your work. If there's something specific that you want them to read for, whether that's the flow of the argument, your use of evidence, grammar, tell them so you can get the best and most relevant feedback possible. Some people like to be in a reading group, others prefer a one-on-one discussion. If your institution has a writing center, you can go there. Some people use a detailed outline. I'm more like Ken, and I kind of feel my way as I write. I have a very kind of broad outline. There are certain issues I want to hit, but I don't usually know where I'm going to end up when I start. And that is the fun of writing, actually. I don't know if that applies at all to science writing, but I just wanted to just say that, again, there isn't one best way to achieve clarity. I have friends who have extremely detailed outlines before they start writing a paper, and others like myself who don't. And again, this is where I'm not sure how relevant some of this is for science writing, because I remember at Caltech when I first started seeing science writing and seeing like 25 authors. Like, how do you do that? So I don't know if this advice about an outline or reading group is even relevant to writing a science paper where you have many writers. And I'd actually be curious to know if anybody's willing to share that experience of writing with many people. For me, writing with one other person is challenging enough. So it's kind of mind-boggling for me to imagine how these papers get generated when there's so many writers. I mean, would anybody be willing to share that experience and just like the difference. I see you nodding your head, Augustine. Do you wanna weigh in?
Sure. Thank you so much for raising this point. We were talking about that yesterday. So usually, more as scientific work becomes more developed by group of people instead of a single people. This is something that we have learned to work. We use usually any kind of shared platform like Box or Drive with track changes.
Right.
But the real truth is that usually there are only one or two writers, right?
Okay.
And then they receive feedback from many other co-authors. So they make comments, they made adjustments, and then usually the first authors and the corresponding author take the lead in integrating that. So when all the authors are, bringing different skills for a single aim, it works perfectly, because you have the people who write, but you have the people that provide feedback and say, hey, I don't understand this, or this can be said in this way that is better, or look at this paper, and then you can decide that. When the different authors don't have the same goal, it's extremely complex, I would say. I have the bad idea to write paper with hundreds of authors, some of them 200 of authors, and I think that this is a terrible thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk about different approaches to writing. And again, this falls under the heading of whatever works for you, whatever gets you through the night kind of thing. Some people do best when they write something every day. That can be a paragraph, that can be a page. 100 years ago, when I was writing my PhD thesis, a friend of mine said, just write 2 pages a day. And even if I had 4 pages in me, I stopped at 2, because what that meant was the next day would be way easier, and I'd have those 2 pages ready to go. I also think that what works in terms of your writing at one point in your life may not work in others. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that. Like and I also just wanted to come clean. I have 2 children, they're adults now. And when they were little, I really couldn't get that much writing done. So just full disclosure, it was very challenging. And there's a gap in my CV, and the gap was filled in with very, special, important things, but not ones I could put on a CV. When the kids went to school, I had more time and got more sleep, and I wrote when I could. And if I had more than 2 pages in me, I wrote all the pages I had in me, because I didn't know what the next day would bring. The next day might bring an ear infection and going to the doctor. And so I just kind of I had always thought of myself as the kind of person who wrote every day, wrote 2 pages a day, very Benjamin Franklin, very, organized kind of thing. But then that changed. And over the last several years at Caltech, I became involved in administration, and I had to change my way of writing again. Fortunately, I had research funds that I could sort of go on writing retreats. And I know I was so privileged to be able to do this. I would have an idea about an essay. I had agreed to write something for a volume. When I was doing my emails at Caltech, it just was impossible for me to draft a 20 to 25 page article. So I was able to go away for 4 or 5 days. So I would bring a suitcase full of books, and I would not come home until I had a draft. And in terms of the administrative work, I was able to polish the draft as opposed to generate the draft when I got home. And so that was yet again a different way of thinking about how I could get writing done. And then some of my dearest friends need to have the deadline like right there. and they write 25 pages in 3 days or 2 days, and they pull all-nighters, and it's brilliant. And what comes out the first time is beautiful. For me, I need to revise and revise and revise. And so I need to build into my writing process plenty of time for revision and plenty of time to get feedback. And I just want to say that I thought what Ken did and Augustine and Hernando's response to Ken's critique was a model of how to take criticism of your writing as not personal criticism. And that's really hard, because when you put writing on the page, you're putting yourself on the page kind of, but you're not. And so when someone comes and gives you criticism, I think this can be hard, but to be grateful for it, and to know that the person reading your work is just trying to make it the best work possible. And it's not about, you know, ego or anything like that. And that, I think, can be very difficult because you feel that it's you on the page. And when you get criticism, you know, the inclination might be to take it personally, but don't. So I guess that's another rule for writing. Don't take it personally. So let's go to the next slide. And I think what I want to do now, okay, so after this slide, I want to go into a breakout session. And I just want to talk about, for me, what my challenges with writing have been. Organizing, especially the start of a project. One book I wrote, honestly, it took me a year to figure out what belonged in the first chapter and what belonged in the introduction. Fortunately, it was my second book, so I had tenure, so I could take a year trying to figure it out. And it wasn't like I was doing, I wasn't doing other things in the process, but it can take a very long time, and you need to be patient with yourself. So just sort of full disclosure about how hard writing can be. And then organization, I'm good at middles. Like once I'm in the middle, like, you know, it's like a stick shift. Once I'm in fifth gear, it's fine. But organizationally, the end of a project can be very challenging for me too. Oftentimes what the end of a book is a piece that didn't quite fit into the narrative of the book. Turns out that the end is often the start of the next project. And again, I don't know if this resonates for anybody, but I just wanted to say that I find conclusions really difficult. It's not, I think in science writing, the tendency is to reproduce in the conclusion, maybe the result that you talk about in the introduction. That's not really the case for my kind of writing. You want to leave the reader with the idea that there's so much more to say. And so there's a kind of invitation for further work, but I'm not sure that's relevant to your writing. And I should also say, and again, I think this is maybe the kind of writing I do, I've become, as I've gotten older and written more and more comfortable using my speaking voice in writing, and using humor in my writing. And I'm not sure that that's appropriate in the kind of writing you do. So what I'd like to do is take a few minutes, and I would like to have some breakout sessions, and I would like you to maybe just take, if this works, Shireen, maybe 4 minutes, 5 minutes. And I want you to get into groups and talk about your challenges with writing. And then we can come back and spend a little time sharing those. Because I think everyone has maybe different, but maybe overlapping challenges with writing. So Shireen, could you split us up into the groups and please, yeah.
So we'll go 5 minutes, and I'm just going to send everyone automatically, but you can come back to the main room if you need to.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
this will help you determine whether the argument is proceeding in a logical, clear, and concise fashion. For me, transitions are crucial. They help the reader move from one idea to the next. We saw in the passage that Ken did a close reading of, the word moreover was used. Moreover, however, as a result, all these words can be so important in guiding the reader along the way in terms of how the paragraphs are connected. Be open to suggestions for revision, but you don't need to accept all of them. You know, you're going to get a lot of feedback. Some of it will be helpful, some of it may not be helpful, and it's important for you to know what is absolutely essential about what you want to keep and what you think needs to be modified. I would suggest that you find an author whose writing you really like and see if you can borrow some of their techniques to improve your own prose. Alternate the length of sentences. We were talking about this in our group about sort of the tendency to be indirect and to be wordy as opposed to succinct and concise. For me, I like to have long sentences combined with some short ones. Rhetorically, that can be very powerful. You don't want to overuse that technique because it can be a little, I don't know, it can strike the wrong note, but sometimes a nice short sentence can be very effective. And then last but not least, and this goes back to the first part of my presentation where I showed you all of the art, all the poetry, I think if there's an analogy or metaphor that you think will help the reader understand what you're getting at, see if you can incorporate it in a graceful way and maybe use it in your introduction or your conclusion. I don't know if that is something that's often done in science writing, but I don't know. I can imagine trying it and seeing if it works. Augustine was telling me that all science writing is metaphorical to a certain extent, so I appreciated that. And then Shireen, last slide, which I think this may be the last slide. Is it? Yeah. So you can close up the PowerPoint, and with that, we just have a few more minutes. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. This has really been fun. So thank you. Any comments, any questions?
Well, when anyone is thinking about question, I just want to say that I love the first part, Cindy. It's so important to understand the way that we think, and the way that we think and the ideas are really, really closer to narratives, to, you know, figurative language. And I think with you that it's quite important when you move to scientific writing to keep that part active. You know, there are some places in the paper you can use rhetoric language or figurative language, but also to connect, you know, in first person experience, to connect with common background, cultural backgrounds, your scientific ideas, in my opinion, is essential. So thank you so much for the first part, and of course for all the other parts.
Thank you so much.
No questions? Bueno, me voy a despedir en español. Voy a decirles a todos muchísimas
I will say
gracias.
goodbye in English. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cindy and Ken. It's been a luxury to have you both. You're very busy people, and you're doing this selflessly. And thank you very much. And this workshop has a big problem. It's like wanting to dance tango, and we had a theoretical tango lesson, but to dance the steps in your living room, but now you must go to a club. So in the future, I hope we can get together.
Donde se trabaja sobre los textos y sobre la escritura, porque es la mejor manera de internalizar estos tips, estas ideas y estas sugerencias. Pero bueno, queda para la próxima. Muchísimas gracias a todos por haberse sumado. Bueno, y si no hay más comentarios,
Thanks, Cindy.
nos despedimos.
Ken.
Chao, mil gracias,
Chao.
Ken, Cindy. Bye, bye.